Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. We have a very special late night edition of our Perceptive Podcast as we are talking to a developer who is in Japan right now. So we're dealing with about like a 13-hour time zone difference or something like that. So we are going to be talking about the game Cursed to Golf tonight with a developer from Chuhai Labs. Please welcome Liam Edwards. How are you doing?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you froze for a second. Uh-oh. we fixed one issue to get another one? Oh, there you are. You're back.
Apologies. We are downstairs in sort of the basement of this pickle restaurant of a studio we have.
All right, but it is great to have you on. So thank you again for agreeing to come on for this discussion. And for any developers watching us, live or recorded, if you are interested in coming on to talk about your games, I am always looking for guests. So feel free to reach out to me any which way. So, it is great to have you on. As I just said, we're going to be talking about the game Cursed to Golf that just released, as of about 5 days ago at the time of this recording. Wow. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to actually think it is out for one, but the fact that it's already been 5 days is quite incredible. It's been a wild few days, a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm. And we certainly have a lot we can discuss. And for people watching us live right now, if you have any questions for Liam about the game, please feel free to mention them in the chat, and we will get to them if or as they come up. So, since this is your first time on, I always like to ask developers, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what your background is when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, sure. I think my journey into game dev is maybe not as traditional as many others. I'm not really sure. I think there's so many different paths into the game industry. But hi, I'm Liam Edwards. I am a game designer and game director here in Kyoto, Japan. My sort of background, I don't even know really where to start because I never really thought I'd end up here being a game designer. I grew up in Wales in the United Kingdom, so very countryside place. One of those kind of towns where people end up never leaving. You're deep in the community and you never really go and leave. So I never really expected to be able to go off and pursue these kind of dreams. But I always grew up loving video games, specifically Nintendo games, playing them with friends, long late nights playing Nintendo. And I was always interested in games and found them to be, such a joy, not only to play, but to talk about as well. And I initially went to college to study animation and film because I thought maybe working in TV would be something that was appropriate in the UK. It was a bit easier to get into. And I'd always grown up, aside from loving video games, loving cartoons. So stuff like on anime, of course, but stuff like Cartoon Networks at the time, the golden era of like Ed, Edd and Eddy, Dexter's Laboratory and stuff like that. I was obsessed with it as a kid. So initially not really studying in games because I thought it was just an unattainable dream. But very quickly after college, I took a gap year and I essentially just, I didn't know what I was doing, just worked odd jobs and stuff like that, played games with friends. And then I went to visit a friend who was in university, and the university lifestyle was amazing, right? I think anybody who's been a student knows the university lifestyle is fantastic. So I didn't really care about going to university, but I wanted that lifestyle. So I said to my mom, who really wanted me to go to university, I will go to university, but I didn't know what to do. And she said, why don't you love video games? Why don't you study to make video games? Like do computer science or something. So I thought, oh, yeah, okay. Because the reason I wanted to go to university was not really the reason why I was going to study, right? I just wanted to live the 3-year lifestyle of playing video games and getting drunk with my friends. So I went and I did computer science, and I realized very quickly I was very terrible at programming, and I was never cut out to be able to program or anything. So that kind of killed that dream. But while I was in university, I just spent all the time playing video games. I played with friends. Played so much Smash Brothers, so much Mario Kart, so much Street Fighter 4, a lot of Halo. but I really found a passion for talking about video games and writing about video games. And so I thought, oh, maybe I can write about video games for a living. You know, I grew up, you know, watching GameSpot, Greg Kasavin and Kevin Van Ord and IGN. And I thought, oh, I could write about video games and that'll be my way into video games in the future. So I spent a lot of time doing like freelancing work for websites and just writing reviews and always being on podcasts and stuff like that. And I eventually got an internship at GameSpot. And that was a lot of fun. I met people like Danny O'Dwyer, who of course now does NoClip, and it was really, really cool. And I just really wanted to work in video games. But it turns out, for as bad as I was a programmer, I was a really bad writer as well. And I blame the Welsh education system for this because, I just wasn't that smart, I guess. But my passion for games meant that I just really wanted to work in something. And because I was doing all these things, I was posting on Facebook and stuff that I was writing reviews or whatnot. A friend reached out to me who worked in QA at Rockstar Games, so the creators of GTA and Red Dead Redemption. And he was like, hey, we're looking for people to come on for the big new project, which at the time was GTA 5. You should totally apply. You obviously play a lot of games, you review games. I think you could, do QA really well. So I applied for a job in QA at Rockstar. I went for an interview. I think I bombed the interview terribly. I just talked about how much I love Street Fighter 4 at the moment. And then I waited like 3 months and I didn't hear anything for 3 months. And then finally they got back to me and they said, no, sorry. Unfortunately not. But they said they'll keep my name on file. And when anybody says that, usually it's just a very, nice, positive thing. But it doesn't go anywhere. So I was like pretty bummed out. I was actually quite upset for a while. But I got a job as a web designer in the UK, and I moved to a new city. And I was working in web design and paid 6 months rent on this apartment and everything. And I was working for about 1 month, and then I got an email back saying, hi, it's blah, blah, blah from Rockstar. We kept your name on file, and actually, we need you. Please come and work at Rockstar. And I was like, oh my God, I've just got a new job. I've moved. I've paid 6 months rent on this place. Oh no, this is my dream. I wanted to go work in video games. So I decided to forego all the rent and everything, and I just packed up and moved, and I went to work at Rockstar. And I started in Rockstar Lincoln, which was a QA and localization studio in the UK. And I spent about 4 and a bit years there working on GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption, starting in QA, doing various lead roles in QA, doing different things across online, single player, and DLC, and a little bit of Red Dead Redemption 2 before I left. If anybody's read anything about Rockstar at that time, they know that the culture of crunch and stuff was not great. And it was burning people out very, very quickly. It was a very tough place to work. So after about 4 years, I was very done. And I just wanted to go do something else. And at that time, I thought, I just want to do something completely different. I don't want to do games. I'm completely burnt out by this. This is not what I want to do. And I decided that moving to Japan would be a great idea for like a year to teach English or something, do like a 1 year sabbatical experience, because I'd always wanted to go to Japan and, not just for 2 weeks. So I wanted to go see all the different cities and stuff like that. So I moved to Japan 7 years ago, and that 1 year came 2 years, became 3 years, and so on and so forth. But very quickly, after about 6 months, I'd started doing podcasting again. I'd started talking about games again, and actually who were really inspiring to me.
Liam, you kind of cut out again there as you were just about
to... Sorry, yes, apologies for our internet here in the studio. It was a case of I started doing this podcast, and I was interviewing indie game creators who were really inspiring, because my experience in video games was that you were a very small cog in this huge machine, and you don't really have any creative input or anything. And then I was interviewing all these people, all of a sudden had a lot of creative control over their video games, they were experimenting with ideas that they just could do and then make. And it was like completely mind-blowing to me. that they could do this. So I got really inspired to sort of start prototyping, start learning to program properly, start, just taking tutorials in Game Maker. And I just started making my own games again. And I started prototyping, making games based on my experiences here in Japan. And then I managed to get offered a job at a studio here in Kyoto, which is a studio called Q Games, which was ran by Dylan Cuthbert, one of the original programmers on Star Fox. And I worked there for a while, and I was a game planner, and then got a job as a director there, and I helped develop and direct video games there. And then as COVID hit, I got very bored because I had a lot of time, and I started prototyping again, and that's when I made the prototype for Coaster Golf.
Nice. So how long has Chuhai Labs been in function, or has been a studio?
Say again, sorry, could you repeat that?
How long have you been doing it actually under Chuhai Labs?
So what happened was the sort of original prototype when I released it, and a lot of people played it, and I never thought anything of it because it was just me experimenting. And then publishers started to reach out and were like, hey, this really could be something. What if we gave you some money and a budget to build a team and you could do it? And I thought, okay, this could be the next step. And one of my good colleagues and friends, Mark Lentz, who is the producer on Coaster Golf, was here at Chuhai at the time, which is formerly Vitae Backroom, reached out and was like, hey, build the team here. We'll do it together. We'll build the team here and we can do this. So we built the team and we started making it. We started development last January, so 2021. Yeah, January 2021. And it was a 1.5 year development, and of course, it's been out now for 5 days. So, long story short, came from Wales, got a job, and now I'm here.
That is definitely an interesting story. You've been to a lot you've been kind of all over in terms of some of the studios you worked at.
Yeah, not a traditional path into game development for absolutely sure. Yeah, that is the. Sorry, apologies. It comes in and out. If I freeze, I'll be back in 2 seconds. Sorry.
No, that's all right. So, when did you first start actually working on the prototype for Coaster Golf?
It was, I think it was around May of 2020. So when COVID sort of hit and we all were at home, even here in Japan, where everyone masks up and everybody socially distanced, and Japan very much dealt with it a lot better, I think, initially. But everyone was still at home, everyone was remotely working, and I just found that I had a lot of free time. And I really now have kind of changed. I still love playing video games, of course, but I much prefer making them than playing them these days. I find so much more creative enjoyment from making video games. So I have a hobby as a job. It's brilliant. And I just started prototyping again. I'd released a game for Apple.
All right, we lost it right as you said Apple.
Sorry, I'd developed a game for Apple Arcade, and I'd co-directed and designed it with an amazing team at Q Games, and it was one of the best times I'd had making a video game. I loved it. And once it released, it's kind of similar now with golf. If you ask any sort of game developer what happens after release, kind of depressing. You go into a bit of a slump because it's not that you stop working on it because work's never finished, but you are actively finishing development, right? It's like this thing that has consumed you for the better half of a year and a half is now over. It stops. It's almost like finishing school, and then you have your graduation, right? And release is like the graduation. Yeah, there's still stuff to do afterwards, but that moment that you build up to is been and gone, and it can be kind of anticlimactic. Thank you to golf. It's not been that anticlimactic because of all of the press and everything that we're getting. So every day is still exciting. But yeah, so I'd been sort of in that same mental space where I was kind of depressed after releasing Scrappers, our Apple Arcade game, that I just started prototyping and trying to explore ideas. And then it was about May of 2020 when I just started bouncing a ball around in a dungeon. And I was like, oh, this is kind of like golf. And then I just thought I'd make a little demo of this little golf roguelike that now became Ghost to Golf. Kind of crazy.
So how did you go from a dungeon to a golf like?
So I was listening to a podcast called Eggplant. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it's hosted by these really super smart game developers, and they initially made it because they wanted to sort of talk about their love of Spelunky and roguelikes. And then it developed into just a general game design podcast. But I was listening to that and I was thinking to myself, why has nobody made a physics roguelike before? Why is nobody really, experiment? Like, there's roguelikes for everything, but why is there not a physics roguelike? And very quickly after experimenting, I sort of realized it was a really stupid idea because you take the RNG nature of a roguelike and then you tie it with the RNG random generation nature of the most random thing in the world, which is physics. Physics is very hard for human beings to calculate, right? Of course, it is calculatable, but it feels random to us. So combining those two things creates a very unfair, unbalanced experience. But for some reason, I felt like it was kind of fun. And if you could balance it right, you could get to a point where it could be a really unique experience. So I just built sort of what I thought like a roguelike level kind of would look like. It kind of was similar to a Metroid dungeon of sorts. And then I was bouncing a ball around it and I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of like golf. You power and you angle. Yeah, it's kind of similar to like Neo Turf Masters or Mario Golf back in the day. And I thought, oh, I know a fair bit about golf because I used to play golf when I was younger. I can change the rules so they match. So the end of the dungeon is the hole, and you've just got to get your golf ball to the end of the dungeon. And then you have like a life system, which became the par. And then, it just sort of all sort of unraveling itself very neatly and tidily where I could explore these different ideas because there was nothing really like it. So there was no rules I had to follow. I could just kind of do what I wanted and make up the rule set as I went.
And I guess it's a very interesting point. How was it like
becoming the Coast to Golf things? Sorry.
That's okay. You froze just that's all right. I guess
Please go.
With the actual come with the physics engine for Curse of Golf, what was that like in terms of balancing the game? Because for people who haven't seen like our play of the demo, we'll probably be doing a play of the full game in a few days from now. It is like working on kind of like the strength of your like when you hit the ball, you're obviously measuring the velocity, the speed, and the angle you're hitting it. And of course, that is something that is inherently a lot more chaotic than, just, swinging a sword or hitting press attack now.
Yeah, exactly. It is kind of hard to calculate and compute. So for us, it was a case of it's built off the back of the Unity physics engine, but with our own touches, right? So the one thing that we wanted to do is that's why it's not necessarily a golf game and it's not necessarily a roguelike. It's this experience that we've sort of called ourselves a golf-like because it's like of both of those things, but not the full experience of either. So because we try to control those elements as best as possible, of course, we still want it to be random. We still want it to feel like, it feels like a roguelike in a golf game, but we're trying to control it in a way that it is balanced towards the player. So the physics degrading of a shot or the random generation are sort of a bit more controlled. So it does feel within the player's grasp. Like if you set the power and you set the angle, you can kind of always guarantee it will go wherever you've hit it, right? There's no, unless you hit a wall or something and it bounces, then it's not going to change trajectory or anything. And it's going to degrade over the same amount of period of bounces physics-wise every single time. But it does become this thing that you have to calculate a bit more in your head mentally and do a bit more mental gymnastics, which is great because that's kind of what I feel like emulates real golf in some way. Like you can see into the distance where you want to hit a golf shot, but in your mind you're doing, okay, well, if I swing the club full or I swing it half or I swing it 3/4, then that will be this much power. And if I hit it like this way, then it's going to go that way. But the wind, so it becomes a lot more of like the mental gymnastics of the real sport. And I hope that somewhat emulates the feeling of real golf. It is kind of unique in its own way. Rightly or wrongly, I don't know.
with kind of the general design, is the game I was trying to like notice while I was playing the demo, is are all the holes, I guess, specifically procedurally generated, or are they set designs?
So that's kind of the trouble that's been through plaguing us through our announcements and everything. So the game is not randomly generated.
Okay.
The levels are not randomly generated. They are all hand designed by me. Um, so it is completely built off the back of level design.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because we've tried to experiment with random generation, but it doesn't work in our favor towards a golf game. It might work for replayability or a roguelike, but it doesn't. We didn't find that it lends itself to making good golf holes that test not only your ability to drive the ball, but your big shots where you want to hit it just really hard and really far, and also those small precise shots that you want to, if you nail it, the satisfaction is really high. And with random generation, there was never an ability to create a balance of one or the other. And so it was really, really tough. So we decided, similar to the way I had done the prototype, which is to build the levels. But we needed that random element to be there. So for us, what we do is we do something called random ordering. So even though you'll only ever play 18 holes in a run, we actually have over 70 holes in total designed. And what it does is then the 18 holes have each slot of the 18 corresponds to a difficulty ranking. So if we take the first hole, for example, the first hole in the first biome is ranked very easy. So then all of the levels that I've designed for the first area that rank very easy, they sort of get like rouletted and randomed, and then it will just choose a hole for you and put it there. And then it kind of does that for every slot with the corresponding ranking, and it builds like this labyrinth of these different shifting holes.
Uh-oh. Oh.
Wow, this does change every time. Sorry. Yeah. The feeling of the sort of randomness comes from what we call random ordering. So it slots everything into a different place each time. So while it's random, what's good about this, it means that the difficulty curve, because every slot is still the same difficulty ranking, it means that every player's experience still has like a very purposely designed difficulty curve. So it should, in essence, always be the same. Whereas with a roguelike, you can have like these peaks and these troughs of like difficulty, because all of a sudden the random generation can throw something really difficult at you.
Interesting, because if you didn't say that, I was also going to assume that it was like a randomly generated in terms of just like the general course designs.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I think that's kind of the sort of secret. Like, it's an open secret, right? If people want to think it's randomly generated, we're kind of okay with that, because we're not going to run out and correct you. But it's not. And I think that lends to what makes the game a bit fair. I know it's a tough game, and I know a lot of the criticism comes from it being difficult. But in terms of like the actual progression, like if you get good enough to a point with it, you're always going to be able to complete it, because the game can't throw any more difficult things at you, because the curve is always a very flat curve towards difficulty.
Interesting. I guess as a follow-up question for you about that, I guess how did like you and the team decide like what is considered like a level 18, like a whole 18 difficulty course, or versus a whole 15 difficulty course?
So, I was the sole designer. We have a small team, so everybody had like a role, but we bounce ideas off each other all the time. But as the sole designer, I came up with some sort of rules that allow a hole to be difficult or not. So there are a couple of different factors. One is the size of the hole, the pure size of a hole. Some of the holes get very large. So the pure size of a hole is the immediate difficulty indicator, because if it's large, it's going to take more shots to get to the finish, which is going to take more of your par count, which is the health. So that immediately is the biggest factor. And then one way to make that easier is to add more shortcuts. So we have a lot of shortcuts, but how difficult is it to get to those shortcuts? How many resources do you need to be able to open up that shortcut? Is this shortcut very easy? Therefore, it only requires like a TNT explosion and then you're through. Or does it require you to climb up really high with a rocket ball to get in? And a rocket ball is a rare card, therefore the resource cost is higher. So then it costs more to get to that shortcut. And then we have one of the major factors is we have shot idols. So we have these silver and gold idols that give you more shots. Does the hole have more or less of those idols? And if it has more, does it have more silver or does it have more gold? And then the balance becomes changing out idols. So there's a silver idol here, but maybe at this point the player is not going to survive. So we'll change that silver idol into a gold idol. So then every hole sort of comes down to general testing and feeling and seeing how much these things cost. But at a basic level, the balance is the size, the difficulty of resource management to the shortcuts, and then what are the shot idols? How many? And do they swing more towards the gold or do they swing more towards the silver? Sorry, yeah, we changed the difficulty of the holes multiple different times to test, and we did a lot of testing to get to the point where we're at now. We're still, of course, even now balancing the game because cash is a big part of the experience, and that allows you to buy resources. So holes are, they fall into those categories of those rules. It's the size, the shot idols, and the shortcuts. And then that became kind of the formula. And if you stick to stuff like that, it means that you can take the same approach for every hole, and then there feels like a consistent, thorough line between them.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like the obstacle designs, how did you like go about deciding like which obstacles you wanted to feature in the game?
It felt like it was always going to have traditional golf hazards because it should. So bunkers, rough, water. And then it was a case of trying to lean into whatever the aesthetic was for each level. So in the beginning, the initial area is inspired by Castlevania. It's meant to be like Castlevania cross golf, this kind of graveyardy, spooky place. So Golf Purgatory it felt like there should be hazards kind of inspired by that. So we have something called the Grave Grabber that it's like a patch of dirt that if you land on it, a skeleton hand will come out and pull the ball down. And then having physics-based stuff, so fans and teleporters, stuff that will manipulate the ball to go to different places, felt like a natural path. And then everything else was essentially just what sounds fun. Avoiding spikes, which is a traditional platforming hazard. Vines that can like entangle and ensnare your ball, but you can burn them away. Making water more difficult by having piranhas eat the ball. It was just us having fun off the back of like having these really standard golf hazards. And then really just walking away with it and trying to have some fun. So I wish we could have added more. We had so many ideas, but at that point you're just stuffing loads and loads of things into a hole that players already sort of get a feeling for, and you want them to, at a glance. One of the big things was to have players look at the hole from a glance and already like within their head be able to calculate the difficulty. If they can see spikes, if they can see like vines, if they can see water, then they're like, okay, this hole is going to be really hard. But if they see them flat ground and stuff like that, they're able to be like, okay, this one looks a little easier. I think everyone can look at like a Mario level and be like, that one looks easy because there's X, Y, and Z. And that was essentially one of the design philosophies was if the player looks at this at a glance, they should be able to calculate the difficulty immediately. And that means you can't have an overwhelming amount of hazards because then that's just too many calculations.
And I guess like to like add on or to like segue from the obstacles, one of the major points about the game, as we said, was about the money and being able to buy the different ace cards or your special abilities that you can use. What was it like balancing or designing them for the game?
That part's hard because like I don't think economic resource management is my strong suit. Mm-hmm. So it was a means to an end. It was kind of you need to get cards, and we experimented with many different ways. Whether it was like at the end of a hole, similar to like Slay the Spire, you would choose a card reward. The one thing we always wanted to do was to just give you loads and loads of cards. Like we don't want to balance the holes. I think the easiest way that people think the design would work would to balance holes for the player to only use certain resource cards. But actually, we make the holes harder on purpose so that you use more cards more often. So because of that, what we do is we have more opportunities to throw cards at you. So it does feel like sometimes you're drowning in cards, but the purpose for that is so that you are using them, because the cards are the other 50% of the fun that comes from the game, right? It's the puzzle element of figuring something out or experimenting with resources to pull off cool shots or to progress in places that you didn't think you could progress. So cash became this thing that was a necessity where you had to get cash to be able to buy cards, and then you could have various different options, these booster packs and individual cards. There's definitely things I would have done in hindsight to make that better and more enjoyable, but it was more of a means to an end. So when you finish a hole, depending on how many shots you finish it with, you gain more cash, and then more cash allows you to buy more cards, and you can take more risks, and it kind of lends itself into more the risk reward. Like there is a lot of risk reward to Coaster Golf, and cash is essentially a byproduct of just being able to get more cards into the player's hands.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, like, part of the challenge is balancing the cards with the actual obstacles and the cores themselves. Because if the cores are all handmade, then you know exactly, what would be needed or if needed at any necessary point in the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I'm kind of happy about in the end, is that when I watch people play, not many people have 0 cards. Everyone always has 10 to 11 cards. And that's because the cycle of finishing a hole and then having the next lot of options presented to you always sort of replenish that. So you're kind of not punished. I would never want to punish the player for using resources. So for example, if you use all your resources to survive a hole, and then you go into the next hole and you have no resources and the hole is just impossible because you have no cards, that sucks. So for us, it's a case of, we'll just give you a bunch of cards all the time. You're not going to get to choose what they are, but here's a bunch of cards, and there's always an answer somewhere in your deck to be able to get around these obstacles. So when you see people sort of finish the game and get to the latter stages, they tend to have 40 to 50 cards in their deck, right? And at that point, we're very happy, because it means that minus really messing up, they should be able to get to the finish. And that's what we want. We don't want people finishing or dying in the latter stages of the game, because you're so close to the finish. So it was always a case of the cards are there to have fun with. They're not necessarily the keys to the problem, because you should always have them. That's what our philosophy is. We want you to look at the shot that you have right now as a problem that you can solve in multiple different ways, whether it's, I'm going to take this path with a rocket ball, and then I'm going to do this, or I'm going to use a U-turn to bounce off this and then bounce up here and do this. So it's always a case of, we wanted to make sure that every shot had all these different options, and by using the shortcuts and having the shortcuts of various difficulties be presented to you, there's multiple different options for every shot approach. And then what's exciting about that is then when you are good at the game and you try to chase leaderboard scores, then it becomes a case of the actual card resource management becomes even more important, because some holes you can get hole in one with if you have the right set of cards. And that can really be something that works in your favor. But do you want to use all those cards immediately? Because you don't want to be getting like more than 10 shots on a hole further down the line if you're chasing leaderboard scores. So I feel like the balance is getting there. Like the initial launch balance was working really nicely, but it still was a little difficult. So we are tweaking it a bit more.
What's your favorite card in the game, or your favorite power you can use?
My favorite, it would be easy to say something like Portal or Drill Ball, because they basically allow you to bypass walls and stuff like that. Like they can be like, when you put them in the hands of me, like I can break the game, and I think that's really fun. But my favorite is just U-turn, because it was like the first power up we came up with. It's the ability to just slow down time and then redirect the ball and fire it in a different direction. So you could hit a shot this way, but then you could slow down time and then fire it backwards. So you could always do these really cool trick shots with it. But if you combine it with time stop, because you're able to combine, like you're able to stack cards in Coaster Golf. So if you combine it with something called time stop, you could fire a shot and then use a U-turn to get up to like a really high place, or you could find a secret area, and then you could use time stop to stop the ball exactly where you wanted it, and it was like you could land wherever you wanted, and it's really, really cool. Recently we found a combination that really broke the game, which is like you could use a U-turn to fire, like, because U-turn gives the ball even more velocity so it can cover larger distances. You could use a U-turn and then a phase ball, and the phase ball basically allows you to turn off the collision of the ball for a certain period of time and then turn it back on. So you could like really speed up the velocity of the ball and then press phase ball, and it would just like fly to the bottom of stages, like through all of these walls. And then you could turn it back on, and then you're like, you've covered like 4 tiers of hazards, and it feels so broken, but it's so fun and satisfying to pull those things off that we're not going to change that, because if players find that stuff out, then fair play to them, they're smart. So yeah, the U-turn is probably my favorite.
Yeah, and it's always great when you have like those like very like crazy combinations too, and you can just like completely mess with someone's ability or just completely break the game like that.
Yeah, and we purposely don't try to explain what they do so much. Like fireball is fireball, turns the ball into fire, but we don't tell you what you can burn in the game, and we don't tell you what it can do. The thunderball allows you to shoot lightning off things, so it'll shoot things that are breakable. So everything that you've experienced so far that could be breakable, you think, oh, maybe that will break that. But we don't explicitly tell you. So when players figure these things out for themselves and they figure out, oh, this does that, there's like a really aha moment, and they have that almost like enlightening that they really enjoy. And I feel like that's one of the strong suits of like the power-ups in the game.
And I guess like one thing I want to ask you about in terms of, I guess, like designing the different courses, designing the different powers, was there any like additional elements that like didn't make it into the finished game? Like again, like I've only had a chance to play the demo tomorrow night from my indie channel. I'll be certainly playing it then. But were there any like mechanics or elements that got cut as you were like balancing the game?
Yeah, like every game, so many things that we wanted to do that we either didn't have time for or we couldn't fit in. We had, from the very beginning, one of the ways that you were going to earn cash and cards was mini games. I'm super inspired by games like WarioWare and like, you know, Kirby Superstar, where you have all those mini games, and Pokemon Stadium, because they're really fun. They take the mechanics that you learn, you know, and then put them on the head, and you do different things. So, and with golf, like there's so many different mini games you could do, and we had so many different ideas, and we had them in the game working, but we just couldn't find the time to give them the polish and love that we wanted. So mini games was a big thing that we had to cut from the early beginning, and that sucked, because it would be so fun to engage in these mini games instead of just buying cars flat out. So that was something I was disappointed by. There was plenty of ace card power-ups that didn't make it. We had like a boomerang ball that you could like fire and then it would come back to you. There's more powerful. There's like a jetpack ball that you could have used and stuff like that. Trying to think, what else did we have that we took out? You had to originally fight bosses every time you went through a run instead of beating them and then being beaten for good. So yeah, it was a lot. Every game goes through iteration. Every game goes through changes, and Coaster Golf is no different. Even in the short development time we had, we experimented with lots of ideas that they're gonna come out at some point, multiplayer and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So eventually, yeah, a lot of our on the floor cutting room ideas will still come back, I think.
All right, and for people watching, besides like the boss fights kind of being locked once you beat them, any other like roguelite or roguelike elements in the game?
We have meta progression in the form of these boons that you unlock after beating the bosses, and then these boons allow you to you can carry them into different runs and stuff like that, and they make the game easier over time and makes it easier and easier to complete a run. Initially, we had a bit more of an unlock structure. We had you unlocking various different things over a bit more of a stricter period of time, but that felt unfun. So we removed that. So a lot of people who are sort of criticizing the game for maybe not being too much of a roguelike because we don't have extensive meta progression like Slay the Spire or let's say something like Hades. It's a golf game, so I'm not really sure what kind of meta progression people would be looking for in that instance. Making the shots stronger and more powerful, but that sounds unfun. Don't you just want to hit a good shot from the beginning? So there was different like unlock structures that we had that we sort of spent time trying to build a bit more of an unlock progression path. But it just became this case of unnecessarily limiting the player from the beginning and just making them have to go through very difficult things to get to the fun, which I don't think was a good idea. So we removed that and just made it a bit more easier for the player and having you unlock everything, from the beginning.
Mhm. I guess the game only being like 5 days out this time, like how has like reception been in terms of like the difficulty? Like are people like moving through the game at a decent clip?
So that's the thing is it's always harder these things because we have a load of people finishing it on one hand, and then the other part is all the negative reviews are saying it's too hard. So you've got to try and meet somewhere in the middle where you have the best of both worlds. So that's something we're trying now. We're going to have an update later this week that introduces hopefully something called practice mode that allows you to play the game freely with your own rules, and you can just get to learn the game mechanics and experiment with the game at your own pace. And then that encourages you to tackle the more difficult part of the game, which is the satisfying part if you finish it. So it's tough because we're trying to balance it for two different types of people. People who want to play a roguelike, who they expect it to be difficult, because roguelikes are expected to be difficult, versus people who just want to play a chill golf game. And yeah, so it's been a bit of both. The criticism is tough when people say it's difficult because you sort of as the developer you're like you can do it, like I promise you, like we have had like even my mother finish the game, you can do it, but we can't expect them to spend as much. Like there are thousands of games, so they gave that one a chance. We really appreciate it. We can't expect them to go back if they've not enjoyed it, but what we can try and do is we can update it in the future so if they do try to go back to it they have a better experience.
Yeah, but in the difficulty side, that's always, like, no pun intended, very hard to do right because it is, very variable based on what holes somebody gets, as well as what their skill level is at the game. Like, we've seen people who, they will push through from beginning to end, and then there's someone who, if they lose on the very first floor, the very first level of the run, done, move on to the next game.
That's exactly it, and that's the case. That's maybe the double-edged sword of making a roguelike, right? Is roguelikes are so easy to bounce off if you don't like them, and they're a ten a penny because there's so many of them out. So the difficulty here is making something that isn't boring for roguelike players because it is easy, and then making something that is approachable. Because what we always wanted to make was a roguelike that's approachable for people who maybe don't play roguelikes necessarily. So it was always tough. And we're still trying to strike that balance. I think we did very well off the bat of like testing it ourselves. Like we go from having 5 people playing it to thousands of people playing it, and that is a really difficult thing because you can't cater to everybody. But we are trying to make it so it is a bit fairer across the board, or it can swing in the player's favor if necessary, without trying to remove the fact, because I don't want to make it easier because I love playing it, and I don't want to make it easier. I want to make it more challenging for myself. So, we're gonna try to make it harder where it needs to be harder, and we're gonna try and make it easy where it needs to be easier.
I guess I'm not sure this we consider a spoiler or not. Are there any like progressive difficulty, ascension modes, things like that in the game?
Not at this moment in time. We are planning. I've always had this idea of a remix mode. Like I really like where games unlock essentially the same holes or the same stages, and they're just really hard. So like the B-sides in Celeste or something like that. I really want to do something like that where I just go back and make every hole more difficult and make it like this really super challenging mode for people like myself who are good at the game. That's something I do want to do. We have a whole bunch of ideas down the line. It really does depend on what the reception is like and the reality of the business, which is, are we able sustainably to be able to keep making content for the game and stuff like that. So at this moment in time, we have the main game, and we're adding stuff this week to improve it and also make it a bit more of a fun experience for everybody. And then going from there, it's a case of like looking at the drawing board and being like, okay, what do we want to add? Multiplayer or stuff like that.
And how has it been for the multiple platforms as well? like releasing it and the reception wise?
Uh, if there's one thing I don't want to ever do again, it's release a game on all the platforms at the same time. I don't think. I think thankfully my hair is not gray, but if I suffered from the ability to get gray hair at 32, I would have absolutely got it because of this. It's one of the most stressful experiences ever releasing games on platforms, let alone all of the platforms simultaneously at the same time. And then, unfortunately, with the Switch at the moment, we've had a pretty major issue that has stopped people playing. So that's something that's really stressful too that we need to correct, and we've got that sorted. So the reception has been good, really good. Like the fact that everybody's able to play it. Doesn't matter what platform you have, you are able to play Coaster Golf. Maybe not on Ouya or something like that, but if you have a PlayStation or an Xbox or a Nintendo Switch or a PC, you are able to play Coaster Golf. You don't have to wait. It is out right now, and you can play it. And I don't know about sales figures or anything like that. We're not privy to that at the moment and stuff. But fingers crossed, they're doing well. Unfortunately, our major platform that we thought would be basically our second biggest to PC, which is the Nintendo Switch, has unfortunately not gone as well as we liked because of this Switch bug that we didn't know was in the build that was submitted to Nintendo. So that was kind of disappointing, and we feel bad for people who've not been able to play it. Who have bought it, but we're rectifying that like as ASAP. We fixed it on the day the game launched, but we have to wait for Nintendo submission process and all of these real world factors that get in the way. It's not as easy as just like flicking a switch and fixing it. So, but yeah, hopefully that one part of that's fixed now. We're just waiting for another one to be fixed, hopefully today, and then the Switch is as good an experience as playing on PlayStation or Xbox or PC. But don't sim ship every platform at the same time. God, it's so stressful.
Yes, as a quick time check, we are about, I would say, like 47 minutes in. I think I have about another maybe like 10 or so more minutes of questions for you. So, for chat, if anyone is watching us live right now, if you do have any questions for Liam about the game, please get them in. This will be kind of last call for questions. One thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of the length of the holes and how they relate to the difficulty. Because this is one of the things I was like looking at some of the comments on the reviews and just from when I played the demo, that the holes tend to be somewhat on the longer side, and especially when you're just starting out and learning the game. I guess what was the thought process or design in terms of length when it came to like each one of the holes?
So to me, they're not holes; they're dungeons, right? And a dungeon is not short. And I think if they were just golf holes with hazards, it would just be a golf game. It wouldn't be Coaster Golf. And then you wouldn't need power-ups like a drill ball or a portal. The idea here is you are moving through a dungeon. You're just moving through it differently. You're moving via hitting a golf ball. So to think of it as like a golf hole is it's difficult to get across to player. That's why we always say dungeon-like holes. So the length comes from, I almost think of it as like the 3D Mario levels, right? The 2D Mario levels are quite easy to go through. They're quite shortened, but the 3D Mario levels can be expansive and make you go to various different areas before you reach the floor. To give you time. Sorry.
Oh, you're still frozen there. Oh, wait.
And back. I can see where the internet flickers into that.
There we go.
Sorry. So they always meant to be like dungeons. They were always meant to feel like something you're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes in to figure out to get to the end, and at the end was satisfying. Because the reality is you're only ever going to go through 18 of them, which doesn't feel that... Like if I said, here's a Mario game with only 18 levels, you'd be like, wow, that's pretty short. That's... So if they were fast and they were like normal golf holes, you could finish the game within 30 minutes. And that wouldn't be necessarily that fun. So for us, and especially like with my prerogative in the beginning, it was always that they were like dungeons. So they needed to be a certain length to match that feeling, to have multiple different pathways, to be figured out. So it was kind of tough to balance that because a lot of the, some of the complaints that people have are they are way too long, and maybe that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for an atypical traditional golf hole, which is not what Coaster Golf is really about.
I mean, I think that's, as we were saying earlier, like one of the challenges of the game that's not quite a roguelike, it's not quite a golf game, it's somewhere definitely in between. And it's always, I
Yeah.
think, very tricky when we look at a lot of the games that, especially over the last few years, when we've seen more experimental takes on roguelike and roguelite design come out. When you do have these very different elements working in terms of trying to create its own unique experience.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think roguelikes have peaked, right? They've peaked at the point where we have the best in the genre. We have the Spelunkis, we have the Dead Cells, we have the Hades. There's no point trying to keep making those games. You're not going to be successful because you're not going to be able to beat them. It's like people trying to make Souls games when From Software already makes Souls games. So there's no, to me, there's almost no need to do that. You already are playing the best version of what those games can be. So it's like all the deck builders and deck building roguelikes. Like Slay the Spire and Monster Train exist. They're the best in the class. You can't necessarily beat them, and you're just making a worse experience for players. So for me, it's a case of experimenting in a genre that still there's room to experiment. I look at games like Crypto the Necrodancer, which is a roguelike that plays in a completely different way, and that is why that game is so good. It's not that it's similar to other rogue games. It's great because it's its own thing, and that's kind of what Coaster Golf was meant to be. It's meant to be an experiment in a genre that is overflowing with very similar games, but doesn't have enough experimentation yet to it. So hopefully we do see more. I hope, because permadeath and stuff like that is really cool. I think that's why it makes Fire Emblem so great. So it is a case of there's still room to be experimented, but I do think people need to stop there's room to experiment.
Yeah, and something I talk about in my book on roguelike design, we've seen just so many of them over the past, especially over the last, I would say, maybe 5 years or so, give or take, with trying to compete with one another. And I mean, we're seeing the same thing happening right now with the whole Vampire Survivors and what's been blowing up in that space. And it is hard because if you try to compete directly, you're just making the same variation. It's just like a slightly different flavor. But then if you go too far out of the wheel or too far out in the weeds, it's kind of hard to get people to take note of that.
Yeah, so it's a case of building something that feels familiar, but then completely unique in its own way, and it's a tough ask, right? Coaster Golf feels familiar because you hear the word roguelike and you're like, oh, if you die, you go back to the beginning. There you go. That's it. Simple. People understand that. But wait, I move by hitting a golf ball? That's unique. But they can kind of grasp it in their head because you know what golf is and you know what a roguelike is. So you try in your head to put those together in your own way. And then hopefully Coaster Golf meets those expectations, but you are at least somewhat able to put those things together in your head. Crypto the Necrodancer, very easy. You move through a dungeon to a beat, and then you're able to figure that out in your head. So I think there's still room to experiment, and we just need to stop trying to make Hades again or trying to make something like that, because those games already exist and they're great and players love them. So it's very hard to stand out if you're not experimenting.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about the platforms, I was just wondering, concerning with the kind of golf interface, is it available or will it be available on mobile or touchscreens?
There's no plans right now, but I feel like Coaster Golf would work very nicely because it's not that physically intensive to play. So I do feel like you could tap, and then you spin and swipe in a direction. The power-ups might be a little difficult to implement, but at the moment, there's no plans to do so, but it's definitely something that we can look into because I think it would work really nicely as a portable experience. So, yeah, we've seen games like Into the Breach currently getting mobile ports, so maybe. Netflix, contact us.
All right, so I guess with that, a few final questions for you. One, you talked a little bit earlier about plans to update the game, some rough ideas. Anything else, like you were talking about maybe having like a multiplayer mode? Any plans for like either like more holes or like more variations?
We have honestly, like we have so many different ideas. We had ideas throughout development that we just couldn't do. We it really is just going to depend on whatever the response is going to be to the game and how honestly, like the unfortunate things is making games cost money. So it's going to be a case of the investment from the studio and the publisher about how much time you do to support these things. So we have like scalable, I would say, amount of ideas. Like here is like what we can do in the immediate term, and then if you give us budget or you give us time, here's all of the amazing things we can do with that time. So everything's scalable at the moment, and we have a lot of different things that we want to do. There's this idea that's been beating around in my head for a long time that I've always wanted to do, but I won't spoil it. But if I get to do it, I know it will be a good, fun thing. So yeah, I think it's exciting if we can do those things.
All right. And do you have any plans for any future titles, or is it still way too early to be thinking about that?
I have a lot of prototype ideas because I'm a game designer. It's my natural element to think of like game design ideas every time I step outside of the house. But no, like right now it's all just like, let's get Costa Golf in a great position and yeah, let's see where we go.
All right. So I think with that, I am just about out of questions. Is there anything else from a design point of view that we didn't touch on or development that you'd like to bring up?
No, I think we covered everything really. Please just if you're gonna buy it, please, I hope you have a great time. Thank you so much for picking it up. If you buy it on Steam, please give us a review because it really helps. So yeah, that's it really.
All right. I guess with that said, before we do like our final wrap up, anything you would like to say to fans watching? Anything to kind of like end the cast on?
Pretty much what I just said. Thank you so much, everybody who's played it, and thank you everybody for the positive reception. I never thought we'd get stuff like a 9 out of 10 from GameSpot and stuff like that. That's crazy. It's been a really roller coaster of an experience. Yeah, if you pick it up, thank you so much. If you pick it up on Switch and you have a problem, I apologize. I really do. But yeah, please have a great time with it. Leave us a review on Steam if you can. And yeah, look out for updates in the future. And give us your feedback.
So, I guess with that, do you have any, for people who want to look you up or look up more about the game, do you have any social media you would like to plug? Anything at all?
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty much only on Twitter, and the game is too. You can find the game at Cursed Golf, very easy. And you can find me at LiamBME. So, yeah, I post about the game updates as well. So, yeah, if you want to know about Japan or Cursed Golf, then you can follow me there.
All right. And for people watching this as a recorded version, I'll have links to everything down below. There's right now just a link to the store page for Cursor Golf, so be sure to check that out. Yeah, I think that is about it. Let's see. Starter again. Chat asks, do you like anime?
Yeah, I do. I used to like anime a lot before I moved to Japan, and then when I moved to Japan, I kind of saw it's a very weird thing where you start to just see anime everywhere, so you care about it less. But in recent times now, I've had a bit more time to myself. Now the development's slowed down. I've actually been watching more anime more often, actually, recently. I've got back into it.
All right. Yeah, I think that's going to be about it. I will probably play a game again tomorrow for my Wednesday night indie stream. So if you want to hang out, it'll be around like 9:30, 10, like around this time. So hopefully you'll be up, or the time zone differences and all that.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll check it out. Thank you so much for playing it.
All right. So, with that said, we're going to wrap things up here. Liam, again, thank you so much for coming on. Again, congratulations for the release and best of luck for what's coming next.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. So, for the people watching, we're going to end things here for the interview. For those of you watching this live, I will be doing my regular game stream in about 10 minutes after a quick refill of drinks. Again, if you are a developer working on an upcoming or recently released game, and would like me to check it out or come on for a cast to talk about it, please get in touch. You'll find my information up there, down below. Do that liking, subscribing, and commenting social media stuff. And otherwise, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Have a great night, everybody, and see you for the next design chat.